Hello, everyone. I'm here today not to talk about church current events or spirituality or anything like that, but rather to talk about someone who's become one of my favorite saints, which is Saint Brigid of Kildare. Her feast day is February 1st, and she is just very, very popular. She's one of the most popular saints in Ireland, probably one of the most popular saints worldwide. We probably all know a Catholic girl named Brigid in Ireland. Her feast day is a national holiday. There's all these wonderful stories from her life. You've got these stories of all these miracles with animals, very analogous to Saint Francis. You've got this charming story where she hangs her clothes on a sunbeam because she doesn't have anywhere else to hang them. And she even has her own cross, the St. Brigid cross. If you're not familiar with the St. Brigid cross, this is the Brigid cross. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there about St. Bridget. If you go online and start doing research about Bridget, you're going to find all these articles claiming that she didn't really exist, that she was originally a pagan, pre-Christian Celtic fire goddess, and that this goddess just was transmogrified into the character of Saint Brigid of Kildare, who didn't actually exist. Or maybe you'll find sources that say Bridget did exist, but that there's nothing really reliable we can know about her, and that all the stories and the imagery we associate with Bridget were appropriated from some pagan goddess. Now, I've studied Saint Bridget exhaustively. I've read all the ancient lives on Bridget. I've even edited and published a book about Bridget of Kildare, which I'm going to plug many times throughout this video. And this is just simply not true. The cult of Bridget is not based on a pagan goddess. Bridget is a historical person, and this is just my opinion. This is the opinion of serious historians and scholars. It's really only in the world of neo-paganism and I guess amongst people who don't know any better that it is asserted that Bridget is a pagan goddess. I mean, you see Catholics repeating this. I've seen this in Catholic articles. I've even seen it in traditional Catholic outlets. I've seen it on New Liturgical Movement many years ago, where someone said that the cultus of Bridget was derived from this pagan goddess. I think they just didn't know any better. But that shows you the ubiquity of this legend. Like, everybody just assumes it's true, and it's simply not. So in this video, I'm going to go through the actual history and explain to you why Bridget was definitely not based on any pagan goddess. And we're going to take a look at several different myths about Bridget and work through them one at a time. So, first, was there actually any pre Christian Celtic deity named Bridget? Well, you might be surprised to learn that the ancient Gaels of Ireland didn't have any system of writing. Well, they had a carved they had this script called Ogam that they carved in stone, but it wasn't something that they wrote literature and history with. They were they were a pre-literate society. Everything was passed on orally. So everything that was ever written down about the Gaels was written down after the fact by Christian scribes. It was Christianity that brought written literacy to Ireland. So there's actually no pre-Christian records in Ireland. So we don't really have any pre-Christian sources. Now, the first records of anyone named Bridget in Irish history is Saint Brigid of Kildare. That's the earliest, and she died around 525. So she's really the first one to have that name that we know of. Now, the next time that anyone named Bridget is mentioned isn't until around the year 700 in the Law Tracts of Ulster, where we get a reference to a woman named Bric, which is very similar to the name Bridget. And she's not a goddess. She is simply the kinswoman of some dude who's mentioned in the Law Tract. And then after that, if we keep going from 700, we have to get all the way up to 900 AD before we see any reference to another person named Bridget. Now, this is in an interesting document called the Sanas Cormac, probably butchering the Gaelic, but what that means is Cormac's glossary. This was a glossary compiled by a Christian monk around the year 900 that was supposed to be a compendium of everything that was known about pre-Christian Ireland at that time. It's written like an encyclopedia with different entries, similar to St. Isidore's etymologies. And what you find in the Sanas Cormac is two entries for the name Bridget, and one of them is for the saint of Kildare, And the other is for what the glossary says was a goddess worshipped by the poets. And what Cormac says about this goddess was that she had two other sisters of the same name. That is, she's a triple goddess, three goddesses named Brigid, who are functionally one. And that the name comes from the words Brigsagit, that means fiery arrow. So this is the first reference to any deity by the name of Brigid in Irish history. And you may be surprised to learn this is also the only reference to a deity of that name. All the entire theory that Brigid is based on a pagan goddess rests on this one passage from the Sanas Cormac that was written around the year 900, which is 383 years after the historical Saint Brigid died. Now, the historical Saint Brigid, her life is attested in documents within living memory of her life. We have Brocan's hymn and Ultan's hymn, two very early sources written in the early 7th century. And then there's two lives of Saint Brigid, one written, the famous longer one, the oldest written by the monk Cogitosus of Kildare, and then another one written by an obscure saint named Aliran. Now, Cogitosus's Vita, he was writing around 650. Brigid died in 525, so Cogitosus never knew her. But there were other people alive who were elderly who had known Brigid in their youth that Cogitosus himself knew. And he says in his life of Brigid, he says that he had the full record of all Brigid's deeds still before him at his disposal at Kildare. So these sources are written like within living memory of when Brigid was alive, and this is why every serious historian acknowledges that Brigid was a real person. I'm not talking about neo pagans. I'm not talking about hack bloggers. I'm talking about if you actually read Irish historians, they almost unanimously agree that Brigid was a real person. So you don't get any reference to a goddess of this name until almost 400 years later. Now, by that time, by the year 900, paganism had been gone for a long, long time. And so what you read in Cormac's glossary is not an accurate reflection of paganism, how it existed, but rather paganism, how medieval Christian monks imagined it might have looked. By 900, the original ancient pagan symbolism and the meanings of these words were incomprehensible to Christian monks of that day, at least in their original context. And given that this is the only reference to any goddess named Brigid anywhere in Irish history, it may just be a literary reconstruction. It might not have even existed. This is very similar to Saint Bede the Venerable mentions a goddess named Yostre in his ecclesiastical history of the English people, and people say, "Oh, this is where we got the word Easter," but no goddess of that name is attested anywhere else in all of Anglo-Saxon literature. So people say, was this a literary reconstruction? Was Bede speculating that there was a goddess based on this, on this word? We don't know. But at any rate, this is the only reference to any goddess named Brigid, and it comes 383 years after the historical Brigid died. So it does not prove any evidence that the historical Brigid was based on a goddess that isn't even attested till 400 years later. Was Kildare the site of a pre-Christian cult? Was there a religious center at Kildare? You'll often hear this that Kildare was built on the site of a religious cultic center. This is just pure speculation. The only way anyone could possibly know this would be if they excavated under Kildare, and that has simply never happened. Nobody's dug up Kildare to see what's under there. So there's no archaeological evidence, but there's also no textual evidence either. There's no written evidence that ever says there was a pagan cultic center at Kildare. This is just pure speculation. So until someone digs up something at Kildare and you see like, hey, here's some ruins of some pagan shrine, then this is just speculation. I mean, all the textual evidence we have actually suggests that Kildare was simply uninhabited before St. Brigid came there. Does the word Kildare refer to a Druidic grove? This is a theory that's based on the etymology of the word Kildare, because in Gaelic, Kildare, Keldara, this means roughly translated Church of Oak or Church of the Oaks. And the theory is this: it is well known that the ancient Gaelic Druids liked to hold their religious ceremonies in oak groves, which were considered to be particularly sacred. And so, because Kildare means Church of the Oak, it is inferred that this must have been a Druidic grove. Um, and the theory goes on to say that basically what happened was there was a Druidic organization there at Kildare in the this oak grove. But then, as Ireland became Christian, this Druidic association gradually just kind of transformed into a Christian monastery. But all the imagery and the symbolism and the stories of this pagan goddess Brigid kind of were transformed and wrapped around this mythical Christian saint. Um, and so, in this theory, the foundation of Kildare has nothing to do with the real historical Bridget. It's kind of like a gradual transformation of a pagan shrine into a Christian church. Now, I think this is reading way too much into the phrase Church of the Oaks. Because if you read the actual lives of St. Brigid, there's a story about why Kildare is named that. It talks about Kildare being built out of these wooden peeled rods. It's in a medieval collection called the Libar Briac, which is a series of homilies on different saints' lives. But there's a biography of Brigid in the Libar Briac, and it tells the following story, which I'm going to read. They came thereafter to the place where Kildare is today. That was the season and the time that Ailill, son of Dunlang, with 100 horse-loads of peeled rods, chanced to be going through the ground of Kildare. Two girls came from Bridget to ask for some of the rods, and they got a refusal. Forthwith, all the horses were struck down under their loads against the ground. Stakes and wattles were taken from them, and they arose not until Ailill, son of Dunlang, had offered unto Bridget those 100 horse-loads. And thereout was built St. Brigid's house in Kildare. So Bridget is traveling across the plains of Liffey and Leinster, where Kildare would be, and in that area, she sees Ailill, son of Dunlang, who is like a king, and he has. It says that he has 100 horse-loads of peeled rods, and Bridget asks for some of them to build her church, and he says no. But once he refuses, his horses will not budge anymore, and so he realizes he's angered God by refusing the saint, and so he agrees to give her the 100 cartloads of peeled rods. And it specifically says, and out of those 100 cartloads of peeled rods did Bridget build her house at Kildare, the house meaning the church, of course. So it specifically says that Kildare was built out of 100 cartloads of peeled rods. Now, the Liber Briac does not say they were oak, but I think we can infer that because the name of Kildare is the Church of the Oak. Understood this way, Kildare does not mean church in the oaks, but it means the church of oak in the sense of built out of oak. It means the oaken church, the church built out of these 100 cartloads of peeled rods. That's right in the actual life. There's no need to have recourse to any wild theories about, oh, maybe there was a Druidic oak grove there. It says right in the Libar Briac that it was built out of 100 cartloads of peeled rods, which were likely oak. Was there a perpetual fire at Kildare that had been kept burning since pagan times? If you go to Kildare today, there's a rectangular stone structure that the tour guides will call the Firehouse, and they will tell you that this is the remnants of an ancient fire that had been kept burning since pagan times, since the times when Kildare was a pagan shrine and had been kept burning throughout the entire Christian era into the Middle Ages. Now, of course, as I said, there's no evidence that Kildare was ever a pagan shrine, and nobody knows what this structure is. It clearly does not date from pre-Christian Gaelic times. If you look at the masonry, it's clearly from the Middle Ages, probably the Norman era, and nobody knows what it was. The word firehouse is just a nickname that the people at Kildare have named the structure. It's not actually descriptive of what the function of this structure was. But this legend does go back to the Middle Ages, and there actually was a fire that was burning at Kildare. We know this because it is attested in many sources, but This legend comes from a 12th century writing called the Topographia Hiberniae, that is the Topography of Ireland. It's written by a Norman monk named Gerald of Wales around 1188. And he describes various places around Ireland. He talks about Kildare, and he says that at Kildare, there was a fire that had been kept burning since the time of the Virgin, and it was staffed by nuns, and that no men were permitted to enter its precincts, or they'd be struck with various curses and whatnot. It's a very wild document. It says all sorts of wild things. It says there was a that they also had a falcon that had been alive for, a falcon that had been alive for 600 years and all these other things. Um, but you'll notice that Gerald of Wales does not say that this fire dated back to pagan times. He said that it had been kept burning since the time of the Virgin, which is very, very different. Now, honestly, these perpetual fires were not uncommon in medieval monasteries. They are attested not only in Kildare, but they're attested at other monasteries in the continent, both of monks and nuns. So they're not specifically associated uh, either with Kildare or with an order of women in particular that maybe derived from some Druidic priestess cult or something. A much more reasonable explanation is that these medieval fires had some sort of Christological luminary value, that they represented Christ, the light of the world. We might remember that in Ireland, the Christian faith was brought to Ireland by St. Patrick lighting the Easter fire on the hill of Slane to rival the Druidic fires on the hill of Tara. So the light of Christ, very common image in medieval Ireland and the medieval church in general. There were perpetual fires kept at various monasteries. There's nothing inherently Druidic about them, but this definitely wasn't some remnant of ancient Druidic paganism, because the Druids didn't have women. There weren't druidesses. There were no priestesses in ancient Gaelic religion. The Druids were an exclusively male order. So I don't know how a group of women staffing this fire could have been an outgrowth of Druidic paganism when there was no precedent for druidesses. We also have to be careful about Gerald's about Gerald's account of Ireland, because he is a Norman apologist writing at the time of the Norman invasion, and he's trying to intentionally portray the Irish as barbaric people, semi Christian, barely civilized, and you can tell this by some of the other chapters in his book. So if we look in his book, the Topographia, he has other chapters that are entitled "How the Irish Are Very Ignorant in Their Faith, Concerning Their Abominable Treachery, Proof of Their Wickedness." In chapter 19, Gerald says that the Irishman is, quote, "indeed a most filthy race, a race sunk in vice, a race more ignorant than all other nations in the first principles of their faith." So he's frequently resorting to rumor mongering and gossip to try to show that the Irish are barely Christianized, that they're savage pagans. And so I think he's latching on to this perpetual fire and trying to demonstrate that it's some sort of uncivilized custom. So we have to be careful. He's hardly an unbiased source. But at any rate, even Gerald doesn't say it goes back to pagan times. He says it goes back to the time of Brigid. That may not be true. If it was true, why was it never mentioned at all until 1188? I mean, this is the first time any perpetual fire is mentioned. If a fire had been kept burning since the time of St. Brigid at the Church of Kildare, you'd think somebody else would have, mentioned it in that 550 years after her death. So I'd say that's pretty unlikely. Is St. Brigid's feast day on February 1st just a Christianized version of the pagan feast of Imbolc? So you have this ancient pre-Christian Celtic feast of Imbolc that falls on the eve of February 1st, going to February 2nd. This was supposedly one of the major seasonal feasts of the pagan Irish year. And the fact that Brigid's feast day falls on February 1st just seems a little suspicious to people. And they say that Brigid's day is just a Christianized version of Imbolc. It's very similar to the arguments where, like, oh, all Saints Day is just Samhain, or Christmas is just the birthday of Zeus. Easter is just the feast of Yostre. That all these Christian feasts actually dated from these pagan origins. Now, this actually comes from Victorian era. If you don't know anything about Victorian historians, they loved reaching back into pagan history and trying to find these elusive connections between the times of pagandom and our own modern customs. They saw pagan customs behind all of our modern traditions. But really, we don't know very much about the feast of Imbolc. Imbolc is first mentioned in the Sanas Cormac, the same text we talked about earlier, where we see the first reference to any goddess named Brigid. And if we look up Imbolc in Carmac's glossary, it simply says Imbolc is the time that sheep milk comes. That's it, the time that sheep milk comes. Now, a little later, about 200 years later, we have another document called the Topography Mir, which mentions Imbolc, and it says that Imbolc is, quote, when the ewes are milked at spring's beginning. That's all it says, when the ewes are milked at spring's beginning. So the only two mentions we have of Imbolc in early medieval literature, well, high medieval literature, they don't mention any religious rites. They don't mention any goddess. They don't mention anything religious at all. They just say that it's the time when the ewes are milked. So it's probably true that Imbolc is some pre-Christian celebration, but of what nature we don't know. We don't even know if it was religious. I mean, the only references to it say it was a time of milking. So it's very much a stretch to say that Imbolc um, was a in the first place a religious holiday, b celebrating some goddess, c that it was one of the pivotal seasonal feasts of the Celtic year, and d that the feast of Bridget grew out of it. I mean, if you think about it, it's first attested in Cormac's glossary, the year 900. Bridget's actual feast day, which is mentioned in her Vita of Cogitosis on February 1st, that is attested 383 years earlier than the first reference to Imbolc in the history of the world. So this really doesn't make any sense to say that Bridget's feast day is based on Imbolc. We know nothing about Imbolc, nothing whatsoever. Now, Bridget was known for her connection with animals. She did work milking animals, but so did every other Irish woman. This is what every Irish maiden did. What was milked ewes, and this was agriculture society that lived by shepherding, herding. There's nothing particularly Brigitine that ties Imbolc to St. Brigid, and almost nothing is known about this holiday. So, again, I think this idea of Imbolc as this major pagan feast celebrating some goddess. This is really a creation of the Victorian era, popularized by neo-paganism. But anyways, if Bridget was supposed to be a fire goddess, why wouldn't Bridget's feast day have been associated with Beltane, the May festival of fire? That the Celts had a fire festival called Beltane. If Bridget was supposed to be a fire goddess, why would she not be associated with Beltane? Why would she be associated with the milking festival? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't think it holds up logically or historically or textually. Are there similarities between Bridget's life and pagan myth? This is something you will see all over the internet. If you start searching around St. Brigid, you'll see all these allegations that one reason people think Bridget is a transmogrified pagan goddess is because there are similarities between her life and pagan myth, but you will not see any specific similarities listed from her life. That's because there really are not any. As I said, there is no ancient testimony to any god named Brigid, at least not for centuries after Saint Brigid lived. Now, on the continent, if you go into Celtic Europe, in the continent, into Gaul and Germany, you do find ancient references to a goddess named Bragantia, which many people say, "Oh, this is Brigid." But what we have to understand is that the phoneme "brig" in ancient Celtic, this simply means high or powerful or mighty. If you know anything about language, you know that in Semitic languages, L, the prefix L, also means the same thing. Like it signifies divinity, right? It's not a proper name necessarily. So, like you have in the scriptures, one of the names for God is El Shaddai, God Almighty. The El just means like divinity, right? Or Elohim, right? Another name for God. Brik is a similar sort of word. So Brigantia might not be even a proper name. It might be a designation that just means the powerful one, or the goddess, or the god. Um, so it's quite confusing what these names actually mean. A great example, if you go back to ancient Canaan, is the god Baal. You know from the scriptures that you've got, the Lord God of Israel, and one of his great rivals during the first millennium BC is the Canaanite god Baal. But what's really interesting is that Baal, the actual word means Lord. It's not a proper name. It's like his title, the Lord. So it's kind of funny in these Bible passages where God says, "Are you going to," or where Elijah says, "Will you worship Baal or will you worship the Lord?" He's saying, "Will you worship the Lord or will you worship the Lord, the Canaanite Lord?" Right? So it's difficult looking back after thousands of years at these names like Brigantia, which there's no stories, there's no myths about her. We don't know anything about her. It's just a name. Is it a proper name? Is it a title? What can we infer by it? We don't know. But the point is, there isn't any corpus of pre-Christian Gaelic myth surrounding any gods that bears any resemblance to the stories in the life of Saint Brigid. Bridget had a lot of miracles related to animals. She didn't do very many healings. Even she didn't raise the dead. She didn't cure. I mean, basically, it was a lot of animal animal miracles. And you don't see stuff like that in the pagan mythologies of the ancient Gaels. And honestly, there's just not much that is known about it. We don't know anything about this other Celtic goddess Brigantia from the continent. If it influenced the Gaels, how, nobody knows. There's just nothing known or tested for us to draw any connections, and none of the specific stories from Bridget's life, nothing similar to them, show up in the myths we do know about. And this is why when you look on the internet and see all this stuff, um, that you're not going to see specifics. You're going to see vague generalities, but not specifics. So I'm calling BS on this one. Was Bridget a bishop? Okay, this doesn't have to do with the pagan goddess theory, but this is another misunderstanding you often see about St. Bridget, where it is asserted that she was recognized as a bishop in Ireland, or wielded episcopal authority. And this is largely based on a misunderstanding of some stories of Bridget's life, and the iconography of Bridget, because she's shown holding an episcopal crozier. So I'm going to explain this and clear this up once and for all. So there is a story about Saint Bridget that when she went to take her she went to take her vows to be a nun before Saint Mel, who was a disciple of Saint Patrick. And Saint Mel and his companion Michael come to hear Bridget's vows and to say the prayers and the blessing over her. And according to the story, Saint Mel is so taken aback by the virgin's by the purity and the goodness and the holiness of Saint Bridget, that that he gets his ordo out and he goes to read the prayers for the consecration of a virgin, and he accidentally reads the prayers of episcopal consecration instead. And then his companion Mikhail says, "Hey, you can't consecrate a woman. You can't give her episcopal consecration." And Saint Mel says basically, "Hey, what I've read. This is a prophecy of something that God wants to fulfill through her." I'm paraphrasing. So this definitely happened, and this is why in iconography Bridget is often shown with an episcopal crozier. It's harkening back to this story where Saint Mel accidentally read the read the prayers for episcopal consecration when he was confirming her in her vows. Now, that doesn't mean that she was recognized as a bishop, though, because when she founds Kildare, one of the first things she does when she founds Kildare is she has to find a bishop, and she goes to get Saint Conleth, who is not even ordained. She sends him to Rome to get ordained, and brings him back there. Now, the reason why this story is stressed, is because Bridget never wielded episcopal authority. Bridget and Saint Conleth governed Kildare together. Saint Conleth, well, let's just read what Cogitosis says about it. Taking thought, she decided that she could not make her foundation without a high priest who could consecrate churches and confer orders on the clergy. So she called on a famous hermit, distinguished in every way, a man through whom God made much goodness manifest, to leave his hermitage and his solitary life and to come and join her in that place, so that he might rule the church with her in episcopal dignity, and so ensure that nothing of the priestly office would be lacking in her establishments. So this refers to the consecration of Saint Conleth to be the first bishop of Kildare. Now, if you're just reading it and not really thinking about it, it says, okay, she called Saint Conleth to rule the church with her in episcopal dignity. Does that imply that Bridget was had episcopal dignity? No, because it specifically says that the reason she wanted him was so there'd be someone who could confer sacraments and could confer orders. If Bridget was recognized as a bishop, she wouldn't need St. Conleth to do that. It also said at the end of the passage that she wanted him so that nothing would be lacking in the priestly ministrations at her church. Clearly, if she was a bishop, then nothing would have been lacking. But she needed Saint Conleth to administer sacraments and to have the fullness of priestly power there. Now, what this means basically is that Kildare had multiple functions. It was not only a church, it was also a convent, and it was not merely a church and a convent, it was also an episcopal see, and it was a town. So Brigid and Conleth did govern Kildare, but Conleth governed it as a bishop. He governed the ecclesiastical side of things. He provided the clerical oversight. He provided the sacraments. Bridget governed the convent. May have governed the monastery. May have been a double monastery, and she oversaw the religious life. That's what it means. Remember, Kildare was a multifaceted reality. Bridget is overseeing parts of it that pertain to the convent, whereas Conleth is overseeing the church, and that's really simple as it is. But it is true that traditionally the founding of churches is a prerogative of bishops. You'll often see in iconography a bishop who founds churches, he'll be shown holding a church. Um, establishing churches is associated with the episcopal dignity. Now, it's not a teaching that only a bishop can found a church. I mean, anyone could found a church technically. Um, but it was commonly done by bishops. A church wasn't established until it had a bishop there. But Bridget was unusual in that she founded a church. She founded the church first, and then she brought a bishop in to administer the church that she had already founded. Now, this is very relevant to the arguments a few centuries later over which episcopal see had primacy in Ireland. Was it Armagh, the one founded by St. Patrick, or was it Kildare, founded by Bridget? And there was an apologist for the See of Armagh named Tirican who argued that Armagh had primacy over all of Ireland. And he even said that he said that every see founded by any bishop throughout Ireland owed allegiance to Armagh. But you'll notice how convenient this is. Kildare wasn't founded by a bishop. It was founded by Bridget, a nun, and thereby there can be an argument that it is exempt from the primacy of Armagh. Now, also, you'll notice that Bridget, when she wanted St. Conleth to be bishop, she did not have him ordained by any bishop in Ireland. She sent him away, she sent him abroad, likely to Rome for his ordination. And this was so that Conleth would not stand in the lineage of Armagh, that Kildare would have no connection to Armagh, not founded by any bishop who derived his orders from Patrick. And the current bishop, Conleth, had his orders from Rome, from the Pope, who I think my theory is that Bridget was trying to get orders from someone she knew outranked Patrick, so that there could be no argument that Kildare was under the See of Armagh. So you see Bridget with an episcopal crozier, not because she was recognized as a bishop, not because she wielded episcopal authority, but because of the vision, or I'm sorry, not the vision, the incident with Saint Mel accidentally reading the episcopal consecration for her, and also because even though she wasn't a bishop, she did the thing that bishops normally do, which is found a church. Now, later, much later in the Middle Ages, when centuries after Ireland had been taken over by the English, when the Irish church had gone over to the Roman customs, when many of the original context of these stories was long forgotten, people saw the images of Bridget with the Episcopal crozier, and they made up legends about her being a bishop. And people in the High Middle Ages love these sorts of inverted role stories. This is where you get the legends about Pope Joan, right? The woman who pretended to be a man and became pope. The medieval people love these stories where roles get inverted, where the fool gets elevated to the position of authority, the poor man becomes rich, the woman takes gets put into a position she shouldn't have in that society. So that legend kind of comes from people in the later Middle Ages looking back at the iconography, not understanding the original context, and just kind of getting vague snippets of the Bridget story and assuming that she was a bishop. So there is really just no historical record of women ever wielding clerical authority in medieval Ireland whatsoever. And I wanted to read another passage that I found here, um, where oh, here it is. Um, this is from the ninth century life of Brigid, the Betu Brichte, and it relates how a pagan man asked Bridget for baptism after witnessing a miracle. Now, if Bridget was acting as a bishop, surely she could baptize a pagan, right? Bridget assents to the man being baptized, but she explains that she is not capable of administering the sacrament. What she says is, quote, "I do not mind, provided that you be baptized," said Bridget, "but there is not a man in orders with me. Let someone go from us to Patrick, so that a bishop or priest may come to baptize this man." And so Braun came and baptized the man with all his household at sunrise. So if she were an acting bishop, why would she need to go get a priest to administer baptism? Anyhow, so the whole thing is nonsense. It's just a misunderstanding from the iconography. Well, that's a lot. I could say more, but I really love this saint, and I hope that this has helped to clarify some issues with Saint Bridget. We should not in any way feel weird about, I've seen articles where trads are like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to venerate Saint Bridget because I heard it's pagan or whatever." It's definitely not. And if you want to learn more about Bridget, a lot of what I've said today you can find in this book. Oh gosh, that's shiny, isn't it? um, The Life of St. Brigid of Kildare by Cogitosis and Other Selected Writings. This has the two oldest lives of St. Brigid, the life written by Cogitosis, which was written within her living memory, and then her biography from the Liber Briac. It also has her oldest lives in meter, Alton's hymn, and Broken's hymn. It has an original essay by yours truly in the front talking about Bridget's life, her authority, her spirituality. And then at the back, I have a summarized version of what we talked about today. If you go to the end of the book, there's a nice appendix. Was Bridget a pagan goddess? Where I go through all the points we talked about in this video. If you want to purchase this book, I've put the link in the description. I do hope you'll support it and just learn more about this wonderful Irish saint. Two other resources about early Christian Ireland I recommend. First, this book, The Flowering of Ireland, Saints, Scholars, and Kings by Catherine Sherman. This is just a beautiful book. It's very accessible. Her writing is so good. This is the lady here. It's from about 45 years ago. Her writing is so good. The descriptions of these places in Ireland are so vivid. She really digs into the spirituality of the various Irish saints. I don't think she's Catholic. There's some points where you can tell by the things she says that maybe she doesn't understand certain aspects of the faith, but it's very minimal. I mean, maybe once every like 30 pages I run across something where I'm like rolling my eyes. But it's just a beautifully written book and it's very accessible and I love it and I highly recommend it. The second one, if you want something way more scholarly, is Claire Downham's Medieval Ireland. I want to stress this is a scholarly book. It is not easy reading. It is dense and it is packed with facts. All about. It's not so much focused on the church. It's focused about like life, economy, society, social institutions. It does mention Brigid and some of the saints briefly, and Claire Downham believes that definitely Brigid is a real person, and that the pagan goddess theory is nonsense. It took me a while to read this book, but gosh, was it informative. So if you like really scholarly stuff, like doctoral level writing, and you want to really dig into Ireland, and you don't mind, 200 pages of impossible Gaelic names, I highly recommend Medieval Ireland. And finally, I've been pushing this book for years, but this is my own edition of the life of Saint Columba as told by Saint Adomnan. Saint Columba is one of the three great saints of Ireland. He's the apostle of Scotland, brought the faith to Scotland via the famous monastery of Iona in the Hebrides. This is his life written by Adomnan of Iona, and as with the Brigid book, I've written an introduction on Columba's life and his spirituality, and there's a bunch of songs attributed to Columba in the back. So if you want some, you can get them together, Brigid and Columba, and go nuts learning about these great Irish saints. I've also, by the way, if you want to share a written version of the argument that against the pagan goddess theory, I've written an article on Unum Sanctam Catholicam summarizing this, and I'll have the link below as well. Okay, take care, everyone. Happy St. Brigid Day. God bless you.